The rain came not as a warning but as a hush, an old hush that draped the town in silver-gray sorrow. The road to the edge of town, little more than packed mud and tired roots, was slick with rivulets. Lanterns behind windows flickered like doubt in a preacher's voice. Most folks had closed their shutters early as if to keep the storm out, but truth be told, it was her they were still hiding from. Miriam Hart had long since learned how to move without sound. The wind did the talking. Her bees slept tight in their hives beneath oilcloth. Inside her cottage, warm light pulsed against the pane, where old curtains hung like dried lace. The kettle hissed over low fire. She sat alone, darning a child's sock she hadn't the courage to throw away, though no child had worn it in years. Then came the knock. 3 times. Not frantic. Not bold. Just soaked. Like it came from someone unsure whether they had the right to ask anything of her anymore. She stood without rush. The limp in her left leg slowed her, an old injury never spoken of, but the ache had long become familiar, like a quiet neighbor you didn't like but couldn't ask to leave. Opening the door, she didn't gasp, didn't flinch. The man standing there was wet from hat brim to boots. His coat sagged with water, darkened by cold. He looked taller than she remembered, but wearier too. His eyes weren't begging. Just hollowed out, like he'd left pieces of himself in every town he'd passed through. In his arms, wrapped in a patchwork quilt, was a crying infant. The man said only this. He ain't yours. But he needs you. She stared at the baby first. Pale, squalling, fists no larger than the acorn caps in her garden. Then she looked at the man again. Elias Boone, she said softly. He nodded once, ashamed. The baby's cry was not loud, but it cut through the storm like truth in a courtroom. Miriam moved aside, not an invitation, not yet. Just enough to let the child out of the rain. The fire welcomed them with a small pop. She took the baby gently, her hands instinctive though it had been years. He felt warm, too warm. Damn. Hungry. Still she did not speak of that. Elias stood awkwardly by the door as if the floor might reject him. She gestured to the rocker near the hearth, the one no one had touched in 7 winters. He hesitated, then sat. I got no milk, she said. I brought goats, he replied, voice gravelly. He won't take it from me. She prepared a bottle in silence. Her hands didn't tremble. Not yet. But the moment she raised the cloth to the child's lips and he latched on, something inside her shifted, like soil warming beneath a thaw. The baby suckled greedily. Elias exhaled, a sound close to weeping though no tears showed on his face. She asked no questions, not about the mother, not about the journey, not yet. Some stories need time to peel themselves open. The kettle whistled. She poured 2 cups of nettle tea. He didn't touch his. You came far? 3 towns back, he muttered. Buried her in Ash Hollow. Silence again. Not many would come to me, she said finally. Not after the girl. I remember, he said. But I also remember what you did for my brother's wife. You held her hand through it. And the sheriff held mine to the fire afterward. You shouldn't be paid for what the town feared. They fear a woman with blood on her hands. He didn't argue. Just stared into the fire like it might answer for him. The storm drummed gently on the roof, not angry anymore, just steady. Miriam unwrapped the baby's shawl, revealing a stitched corner with initials. MB. Her gaze lingered. Was this her blanket? Elias nodded. She made it while waiting. Thought it'd be a girl. The baby hiccuped once, full belly soft and breath slowing. Miriam stood and carried him toward the cradle in the far corner, covered in a cloth like a grave that never got dug. She peeled back the cover. The wood creaked as she laid the child down. He stirred but didn't cry. Just turned toward the warmth of her palm as she lingered above him. I never thought I'd hear that sound again, she whispered. Elias looked up. What sound? The hush after a child stops crying. He didn't respond. Only watched as she pulled a shawl around her shoulders and returned to the fire. You want to tell me why? She asked, not accusing. I was ashamed, Elias said. Didn't want to beg. Didn't want to come to the woman they all call cursed. They called me worse. He nodded. I believed them. Till she died. Then none of their words mattered. She tilted her head. And now? He looked her in the eye for the first time. Now, I believe in anyone who's still standing. There it was. The beginning of something unnamed. Not a friendship. Not trust. Just a flicker of shared ruin, made warmer by the child between them. Outside, the storm tapered into mist. The bees would stir by morning. The town would talk. Miriam already knew that. But inside, the baby slept. Elias leaned forward, elbows on knees, and stared at the fire. She didn't offer him the bedroom. He didn't ask. When she finally stood to bank the coals, she said softly, almost like prayer, "You say he ain't mine. Maybe not by blood. But something brought him here." He nodded. "You got a name for him?" she asked. He shook his head. "Didn't want to name him until I knew where he'd belong." She glanced toward the cradle. "Then I suppose you're halfway there." He rose slowly, boots echoing on the plank floor. "I'll go," he said, though he didn't move. "You already did," she answered. And came back. She watched him take off his wet coat and hang it by the fire. She didn't stop him. Didn't tell him to stay. Only left the door unlocked that night for the first time in years. And when the baby stirred again just before dawn, it was Elias who reached him first. Some stories don't begin with love. Some begin with need. And sometimes that's the holiest thing of all. The wind that followed the rain carried no apology. It swept low across the prairie, brushing frost against fence posts and tugging at loose shutters. Morning light crept through the small-paned window of Miriam Hart's cottage like a guilty guest, soft and unsure, laying its pale hand on the child still sleeping in the cradle by the fire. Elias Boone stood at the sink, rinsing a tin cup in silence. His shoulders were slumped, heavy from a night spent half sitting, half watching, caught between sleep and the slow understanding that he had placed a life into the hands of a woman the town no longer trusted. Miriam was already up. She didn't clatter. She moved like memory, soft, faded, but undeniable. Her limp was more pronounced in the early hours, and he watched her rub her hip once while spooning crushed oats into a small pot. She didn't speak. He waited, feeling the weight of the unspoken stretch between them. When the baby stirred with a soft mewl, it was Miriam who moved first. She didn't hesitate this time. No fear in her touch. Only something that looked dangerously like knowing. She held the baby in the crook of one arm and fed him slow, patient, as though the rhythm might steady something in herself too. Elias sat across from her. "I never learned how to feed him," he said. She nodded, not judging. "Most men don't." He rubbed his eyes. "He wouldn't take it. From me. Screamed every time." He was grieving. "I thought that only came later." "It comes when it wants," she murmured. "Babies feel what they don't understand." He looked at the child, then back at her. "So do grown men." She didn't smile, but something softened at the edges of her face. The baby finished and drifted back into sleep with a little sigh. She carried him to the cradle and covered him with the blue shawl again. Then she turned to Elias. "You said you buried her in Ash Hollow." He nodded. "How'd she die?" He exhaled. "Blood wouldn't stop. Came too fast. I waited too long. Thought the neighbor's girl could help." She ran off screaming. "You didn't send for a midwife?" "I thought I could handle it." She turned her face from him. "No," he said quickly. "I didn't mean it like that. I didn't want to bring your name back into the house. Not after what they said. What I said. And now. I'd bring your name to heaven if it'd keep that boy breathing." The word struck her square. She looked at him as if seeing him for the first time. He cleared his throat. "I heard she died, that girl you helped. But folks didn't say much about how she was already bleeding when she came to you. They just said you failed her." Miriam reached for the edge of the table, steadying herself. "I never knew the full of it," he continued. "Just took their word and turned my back." "You weren't the only one," she said, voice low. "I'm sorry," he said. The apology hung in the air, full of rust and weather. She didn't offer forgiveness. Not right then. Outside, the wind dragged leaves across the steps. Somewhere in the distance, church bells chimed. Later, she bundled the child and stepped outside to check the beehives. Elias followed her with his coat pulled tight and a tentative step. She moved slower today, favoring her left leg. The baby slept against her chest. He watched her tend to the hives, hands sure practiced. She tapped the sides gently, listening. "They're hungry. Storms keep 'em in too long." Elias leaned on the fence, watching her with the bees. "Why do you keep doing this? After they all turned?" She didn't answer at first. Then, "Because something still needs me. Even if it's just honeybees." They walked back in silence. The baby snuffled and turned his head against her shoulder. Inside, Miriam began stirring honey into warm water for the child's bath. "I brought him here because I had nowhere left," Elias said quietly. She poured the mixture into a basin, testing the temperature with her wrist. "I figured that. But I also brought him here because I thought, maybe, I wasn't supposed to raise him alone." Her hands paused. He stepped closer. "I'm not asking for anything. I just needed someone who wouldn't look at him and see a mistake." And what do you see? I see a reason I'm still breathing. She lowered the baby into the warm basin, one hand supporting his tiny back. The infant kicked a little, then relaxed, sighing as if the water remembered him. Elias knelt beside her, silent, watching her work. He noticed the way she cupped water gently, poured it over the child's chest, humming low. She said, "You still haven't named him." "I know." "Why?" He met her eyes. "Because I don't know who he'll be. Not yet. Not until I stop being the man who let his mother die." Her hands froze. "I wasn't cruel," he whispered. "I was just proud. And pride kills just as easy as fever." She looked down at the baby. "He's warm now." Elias reached out, fingers brushing the towel she'd prepared. He lifted the child into his arms. The baby blinked sleepily and didn't cry. Elias wrapped him slowly, like he was wrapping up his own guilt in soft linen. Then came the knock on the door. Miriam's body stiffened. Outside stood Mrs. Evelyn Pike, bonnet drawn tight, chin lifted like she expected to find sin inside. Behind her, two women from the prayer group, their hands clasped too tight to be only praying. "Morning," Miriam said evenly. Evelyn's eyes darted between Miriam and Elias, then landed hard on the child in his arms. "So it's true," Evelyn said. "You've taken in a man. And a child with no name." Elias didn't speak. Miriam stepped forward. "What do you want, Evelyn?" The older woman's voice curled. "Just came to offer guidance. Surely, you understand how fragile your reputation already is." Miriam's hands clenched behind her back. "I stopped caring about my reputation the day they left me to bury a girl alone. And now you've taken in another man's burden. That child should be with a good family. He's with someone who won't pretend kindness for the sake of appearances." Evelyn sniffed. "We'll be watching, Miriam." "Then you'd better bring a chair." Elias watched as the women turned away, stiff skirts swaying, whispers already beginning. When the door closed, he let out a long breath. "That gonna be a problem?" "It already was," she said simply. The day wore on with little said between them. But something had shifted. That evening, Elias found a hammer and began fixing the loose step on her porch. She brought him nails and held the wood steady. He didn't thank her. She didn't smile. But when the child cried out in the middle of the night, it was Elias who rose. And it was Miriam who brought the warmed bottle without being asked. Before he fed the baby, Elias looked over at her in the dim firelight. "He ain't mine, not really," he said. She leaned against the doorframe, her shawl wrapped tight. "He's not mine either," she replied. "But he's here. And sometimes that's enough." He nodded. A few moments passed. The fire crackled. The baby fed slow, eyes wide and calm. "I don't know how to raise a child," he admitted. "I didn't either. Until I held one." The baby's fingers wrapped around Elias's thumb. "Small. Sure." And just like that, something settled. Not peace, not yet, but a quiet kind of pact. The world outside would circle, judge, whisper. But in that little house, on that cold night, a man with no right sat beside a woman with no reputation. And between them, a child they both claimed in silence. Tomorrow would bring new trouble. But for tonight, the cradle stayed full, the door unlocked, and the fire warmed up. By mid-morning, the frost melted off Miriam's window pane in slow beads, like tears that had waited through the night to fall. The town had started whispering before the sun had fully risen. And by the time Miriam stepped into the yard with a jar of warmed milk and a knitted cap atop the baby's head, the smoke was already rising from the chapel stove, and from the townspeople's mouths. It started in the pews. Evelyn Pike's voice was the flint, the others just caught the spark. "He's sleeping under her roof. With a child that ain't hers nor his. Scandal don't stay quiet forever. She's trying to play mother again. Like the last time didn't end in a grave." The words stretched like fence wire, tight and slicing. But Miriam didn't look toward town. Not once. She had bees to tend, roots to cover, and a porch with 3 broken steps that Elias had begun mending after breakfast, jaw set like he was trying to fix more than wood. The baby was better. His eyes followed light now. He made soft sounds at Miriam's hums, and wrapped his fingers around her shawl whenever she held him near. There was strength in that grip, a kind of claim. Elias caught her watching the boy one afternoon while she rocked him on the back stoop. "You ever think about having one of your own?" he asked. Her hand stopped mid-motion. The silence between them stretched again, and for a long moment, it seemed she wouldn't answer. "I did," she finally said. "Once." He waited, but she didn't continue. Later, while Elias gathered wood near the edge of her land, Miriam stood alone in the garden. She touched the edge of a forgotten cradle of soil, now full of new sprouts, small greens fighting through thawed dirt. She didn't remember planting them. That afternoon, Elias brought back news from the general store. "They say you're the reason his mother died," he said, not looking at her. "That I brought him to you as some twisted way of blaming you." Miriam said nothing. He stepped closer. "They're looking for a reason to see you gone." Her eyes narrowed. "Let them. I've been gone longer than they know." He shook his head. "You shouldn't carry this alone." She turned to him, the wind catching loose strands of her hair. "And what would you know about carrying things alone?" His jaw clenched. "More than I wish I did." She let the silence answer for her. Inside, the baby cried. Both turned toward the sound at once. Miriam moved first. Her limp was less noticeable now. Habit was making her strong again. She held the child against her chest, rocking slow, whispering soft syllables he didn't understand but somehow needed. Elias stood near the hearth, one hand gripping the mantle. "I failed her," he said suddenly. Miriam glanced at him. "My wife. I thought I could do it without help. I thought asking you would be surrender." Miriam's voice was low. "It would have saved her." "I know." He stared at the flames. "I used to think," he said, "that men were supposed to be the strong ones. That shame was better than weakness. But now, every time he cries, I feel like he's asking me why I let her die." Miriam stood quiet for a moment, then crossed to him and handed him the baby. "Hold him," she said. He did. The baby quieted almost instantly, resting a cheek against Elias's collarbone. Elias's hand settled behind the boy's back. "You didn't fail her because you were weak," Miriam whispered. "You failed her because you were alone." The door rattled suddenly. They both turned. Someone had thrown something, mud perhaps or worse, against the window pane. The baby jerked awake with a cry. Elias moved toward the door, but Miriam stopped him with one hand. "No. They can't just. They will. Because they always have. And if you step outside angry, you'll give them the ending they're praying for." He stood frozen, breathing hard, hand on the doorknob. Then slowly he stepped back. She tucked the baby in a blanket, kissed the top of his head, and hummed a lullaby from a different life. One that never saw daylight in this town. By evening, Miriam sat stitching by the fire. The baby lay curled beside her, his fingers occasionally twitching in dreams. Elias paced near the shelves, scanning her jars. "You keep everything," he said. "They may come for my name again," she replied, eyes not lifting. "But I won't let them take the healing too." He turned, arms folded. "Do you ever wish you left?" "All the time." "Then why didn't you?" She looked up at him, needle paused. "Because if I leave, they win. They bury the truth with my name. And women like me stop mattering." Elias studied her in the firelight. "You matter." She held his gaze. For a long moment they didn't blink. Then she spoke. "Do you know what the town hates more than a fallen woman?" "What?" "One who stands back up." The next morning, while hanging linens in the yard, Miriam caught sight of a child watching from the tree line. A girl, 7 maybe 8, barefoot, face pinched with curiosity and fear. Miriam lifted a hand, slow and gentle. The girl hesitated, then ran. That afternoon a rock came through the window. It missed the cradle by inches. Elias patched the glass with board and cloth. Miriam swept the shards without a word. They didn't eat much that night. The baby was restless. The house felt smaller. But when Elias stood at the threshold, eyes toward the dark, Miriam didn't tell him to come in. She just said, "The child isn't the only one they're trying to run off." He turned. "You're not a burden, Elias," she said. "You're just a man who's not done yet." He took off his coat, hung it beside the door, and stayed. Outside, smoke curled from chimneys, from mouths, from lies that burned hotter the longer truth stayed standing. But inside the cradle was full, the fire still warm. And the town, for all its whispering, couldn't unmake the quiet bond forming between the man with no pride left, and the woman with none to lose. Not now. Not anymore. It began with a summons written in ink too neat to be anything but sharp. Sheriff Dake delivered it himself, arriving on horseback just past sunrise, his coat still smelling of last night's tobacco and the hush of pews. He didn't dismount at first. Just sat with his reins slack and a look on his face that had once passed for pity but now barely masked the weight of old decisions. Miriam stepped onto the porch with the baby in her arms, a bottle in one hand, her eyes steady as iron. "Town council wants a word," Dake said, voice like gravel dragged across wood. Elias appeared at the door behind her, jaw tight. The sheriff's gaze flicked to him. "This ain't about your pride, Boone. It's about what's best for the child." Miriam didn't blink. Best according to who? The law, Dake said flatly and handed her the paper. The ink curled in loops too clean to argue with. Meeting at noon. Town hall. Attendance mandatory. Custody in question. Elias muttered something under his breath. Miriam didn't speak. She just nodded once and closed the door behind her. They arrived to stairs, though no one spoke to them directly. The streets had emptied of noise, no children running, no hammers ringing from the smithy. Only the clatter of their boots and the baby's soft cooing against Elias's chest. Miriam walked beside him with her head high and her shawl pulled close. She no longer cared what they whispered. Inside the hall, the benches were packed. Sheriff Dake stood at the front beside two elders and Mrs. Evelyn Pike, who looked every inch the figure of righteousness draped in widow black. Elias held the baby steady. Miriam's hand brushed his back. He flinched at the contact, then steadied. Dake cleared his throat. We gather today under concern. A child without proper parentage is being housed by a woman with no formal claim and a man who cannot legally account for the child's lineage. Murmurs stirred. Miriam did not move. He's the child of Elias Boone and a deceased woman named Maybeth Boone. But without record of birth or name and no living maternal relatives, this town has an obligation to determine his care. Elias took a breath. And what of the father? He asked. You have no documentation, said one elder. No name for the boy. No record of marriage. And this, he gestured toward Miriam, is a woman already disgraced by medical misconduct. The town remembers. Miriam's mouth was a hard line. The town remembers what it wants. A louder murmur. Someone hissed. Mrs. Pike stood. We're prepared to offer the child into a more stable household. One with a mother. A church-going woman. I've raised children. He would not want for anything. He doesn't want for anything now, Elias snapped. He needs a name, Pike said. He needs a place. And you're living in the house of a woman shunned by every respectable citizen for miles. Miriam turned to the council. You think because you watched me fall I forgot how to stand? She said, voice level. I never once raised my voice in my own defense. I let you whisper, let you carve me hollow. But that child came to my door cold, motherless, and hungry, and I did what none of you did. I opened it. Dake stepped forward. The question is not what you've done, Miss Hart. It's what right you have to continue. Elias moved before he could think. Stepped between her and the council. I don't have papers, he said. I don't have land anymore. Or a wife. But I have this boy. I carried him across 3 counties looking for someone who wouldn't turn him away. And now you're telling me you'd take him from the one person who didn't. Mrs. Pike stepped forward. The law. The law, Elias growled, didn't hold my wife's hand while she bled out. That silenced them. Even Pike took a step back. Elias turned to Miriam, gently handed her the baby. Then looked at the crowd. You want to say I failed her? Fine. I did. I failed her the moment I listened to men like you instead of women like her. But I won't fail this boy. His voice cracked and he hated it. But he let it. I don't care what your records say. That child knows the smell of her shawl. He quiets when she sings. He reaches for her. You want to tear him from that just to feel right? A long pause. The council glanced at one another. The weight of the room shifted like a breath held too long. Then the elder said, the law requires formal kinship to assign custody. Marriage would suffice. The hall went still. Elias turned toward Miriam, eyes wide. She looked back calm, thoughtful, not surprised. Is that what this is? She asked. A bargain dressed as mercy? No, Elias said immediately. No, it's not. He turned to the crowd. I didn't come here looking for a wife. I came looking for someone better than me. And I found her. And I'll marry her if I must. But don't mistake it. This isn't duty. It's a debt. One I'll never finish paying. The room crackled with tension. Miriam looked down at the baby in her arms. He slept peacefully, unaware of the war being waged in his name. She stepped forward. I'm not marrying him today, she said, clear and unafraid. A gasp. But I won't surrender this child either. A louder murmur. Mrs. Pike looked ready to explode. Miriam turned to the elder. If the law says only kin may raise him, then I'll claim him. I'll sign whatever papers you need. I'll raise him as mine. You're no relation, someone called. Neither was Moses to Pharaoh's daughter, she said. But it saved a life. The elder hesitated, then slowly nodded. We'll draw up guardianship papers. But the matter isn't closed. We'll observe. That's all you've ever done, Miriam replied and turned her back to them. Elias followed her out, stunned into silence. Outside the air had warmed slightly. The clouds broke open just enough to let sunlight catch the porch railings in gold. Elias exhaled like he'd been holding it for days. You didn't have to do that. I did. Even without me? She looked at him. Especially without you. He swallowed. You meant it though? She didn't answer. She walked ahead. But he saw the smallest nod just once. That night the wind died. The fire burned low. Elias repaired the cracked cradle. Sanded the edge smooth with slow, careful strokes. Miriam watched from the corner, rocking the baby in rhythm to the sound of the rasping wood. Neither spoke of marriage again. Not yet. But in the quiet, something settled between them, gentle, necessary. Outside the town still watched. But inside the child slept. And for the first time since he'd arrived at her door, he smiled in his sleep that a thin frost painted the edges of the fence posts silver, glistening in the dawn light like lace stitched by the cold. The prairie held its breath. Not a bird moved, not a branch dared creak. Even the bees in Miriam's hive stayed tucked inside their wooden homes, waiting. Inside the cottage, the baby stirred, his whimper small but urgent, the kind that said he'd outgrown his dreams and needed something real. Warm arms, steady hands, a voice to remind him he wasn't alone. Elias was already at the hearth, rubbing the sleep from his eyes as he took the child gently, without a word. His movements were sure now. Familiar. He didn't need prompting, didn't look to Miriam for permission. She watched from the threshold of the bedroom, her shawl gathered at her throat, hair still unbraided from sleep. There was no mistaking the softness in her expression, but it wasn't love, not yet. It was something older than love, something made of earned respect and the quiet marvel of survival. She stepped forward and handed him a warm bottle without being asked. Their fingers brushed. Neither spoke. A knock came at the door. Neither moved for it. It came again, louder this time, with the authority of someone used to being obeyed. Elias shifted the child to one arm and opened the door with the other. The cold rushed in. On the porch stood Sheriff Dake, hat in hand, behind him 2 riders, strangers not townsmen, their coats marked by state authority. What is it? Elias asked, voice calm. Dake hesitated, eyes dropping to the child, then to Miriam who stood just behind Elias now, her shoulders back. These men come from the county, Dake said. They got word from Evelyn Pike. Said there's question about the guardianship. They want to see papers. They want to speak to Miriam. Alone. No, Elias said at once. Dake raised a hand. Let's not make this harder. It's already hard, Miriam said. She stepped forward, past Elias, past the child. Her bare feet touched the cold boards of the porch without flinching. You men want to talk, but not without the child. I won't leave him behind. The 2 riders exchanged glances. One nodded. That's acceptable. She wrapped the child in a shawl and followed them down the path to where the horses waited near the old tree. Elias stood on the porch, watching, his hands fisted at his sides, powerless again. The questioning happened in the open. A table dragged out from the church hall, ink freezing in its well, papers flapping in the wind. They asked for documents. She provided what she had, her mother's Bible, handwritten records, a note Elias had scrawled in the margin of the child's blanket that read, "He has her eyes." Nothing official. Everything true. You've no blood claim, one man said. No marriage. No name passed. I have something better, she replied. I have a child who stops crying when I hold him. That's not law. No, she said steady, it's mercy. The man looked at her for a long moment as if weighing something heavier than law. We'll return with a judge, he finally said. They left the same way they came, quiet, faceless, unshaken. But they left with empty hands. Elias walked her back home. I should have gone, he said. You've gone far enough, she answered. That evening, Miriam braided her hair for the first time in weeks. She lit every oil lamp. She made stew with what little they had. Elias shaved, combed his hair, and dressed in his least worn shirt. The baby slept between them at the table in a basket Elias had mended with new rope. The door stayed unlocked that night. And still no one came. Morning arrived with the sky bruised purple and the wind howling across the prairie like something ancient had been stirred. Miriam stood at the window, clutching the baby to her chest. Elias came up behind her, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. They'll be back, he said. I know. You scared? No, she said. Just tired of being brave. He looked down at the child. We should name him. She nodded slowly. You first. He took a long breath. Samuel. She smiled. I was thinking the same. Later that day word came that Evelyn Pike had fallen ill. Bedridden. No one visited. By week's end the county sent word again. No judge was coming. No charges. No removals. The case had fallen through cracks too small to matter anymore. Elias stood on the porch reading the letter, the wind tugging at the page. He folded it carefully and set it on the table inside. Miriam was nursing Samuel in the rocker, her eyes closed, humming something that had no lyrics but felt like home. "You did it," Elias said. She shook her head. "We did nothing but survive. That's more than most." Spring broke through the last of the frost that month. Shoots bloomed at the fence line. Miriam's hive stirred. The boy started to laugh, a soft, gurgling sound that made Elias set down his tools and just listen. One morning, Miriam woke to find Elias repairing a small wagon wheel. She stepped into the yard with Samuel in her arms. The child reached out toward the light, his smile wide. Elias looked up. "You never asked me to stay," he said. "I never needed to." He stood, brushing sawdust from his hands. "I'd like to anyway." She looked at him long, then nodded. In that small nod lived everything the town had denied them. Dignity, choice, grace earned slowly and without fanfare. They never married, not with papers or vows, but the town stopped asking. Instead, they watched a woman once cast aside rebuild her porch, one beam at a time. They saw her laugh at the market. They saw a man carry a child on his shoulders through the chapel green. And when the child said "Mama" for the first time, it was in Miriam's arms. A year passed. Then two. And no one remembered the scandal, only the child who always smiled and the couple who never needed a title to belong. Some stories don't need fire to end with light. Some just need time. And hands that don't let go. And when the town spoke of them now, it was in softer tones, around full tables, under golden dusk. And if anyone ever asked how it all began, the story would always start the same. He knocked on her door in the rain, holding a baby, and said, "He ain't yours. But he needs you." And she, with hands that had been burned and healed again, opened the door and let him in. Sometimes the people you're meant to save are the very ones who save you back. Not with words. Not with promises. But with the quiet decision to stay when the world tells you to go. And if you ever feel unclaimed, unseen, remember, mercy isn't loud. It's a hand that knocks and a heart that dares to answer. The rain came down like judgment. Not a gentle drizzle, not a kind soak for dry earth, but a hard, slapping kind of rain that scoured roofs and soaked through coats. The kind that made the land smell like old sins and mule sweat. Harlan Tate leaned forward in his saddle, collar high, jaw clenched. The road to Tanner's Ridge had turned to a soup of mud and regret. His horse, an aging gelding named Crow, groaned beneath the weight and terrain. But Harlan didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Not when a man was this close to his own ghost. He hadn't been out this way in over a year. Too many memories tangled up in these pines, especially when the wind moved just right and whispered like a child calling, "Papa?" The note had come 2 days prior. Scrawled in ink gone watery and gray, slipped under his door like a secret. "Got a stallion worth your coin. Good legs. Fast. Signed only, T. Rourke, Tanner's Ridge." Harlan had half a mind to burn the damn thing. But something about the name Rourke tugged at him. The same way old wounds do when the weather shifts. And so here he was, water soaking through to his bones, boots slipping in the muck, heart pounding like it did that first night she didn't come home. He spotted the barn before the house, a leaning heap of timber that had seen better decades. The lantern swinging on a hook by the door was barely more than a flicker. No smoke from the chimney. No sound but the hiss of rain and the creak of Crow's saddle. A man stepped out of the shadows. Wiry, hunched, maybe 40 but worn like 70. Grease on his shirt, one eye milky. He squinted at Harlan, then forced a smile that didn't sit right. "You Tate." Harlan didn't bother nodding. He just swung off Crow and tied him to the post. "You Rourke. That's what they call me. Let's see the horse." Rourke hesitated. Not long, just enough to be noticed. "In the back stall," he said, gesturing. The barn creaked as they entered. Smelled of damp hay, rusted tools, and something else. Something sharp, sour. Harlan's eyes adjusted slowly. A row of stalls, all empty but one. A dark shape shifted inside it. The horse? No whinny. No stomp. "You keep your horse tied down like that?" Harlan asked. Rourke scratched his neck. "He's a kicker. Don't like folks much." "Neither do I." He moved forward, boots thudding over planks, senses prickling. The stall was closed with a warped door held by rusted iron. He pushed it slowly and stopped. Not a horse. A girl. No, a woman, grown, filthy, half-curled into herself. wrists tied in frayed rope, gag in her mouth, a strip of green cloth around her shoulders, ragged and water-stained. For a second the world went silent, like the storm outside had been sucked into the boards. Harlan couldn't breathe, couldn't blink. The green cloth, it was patterned with little white roses. He remembered that cloth. His wife had sewn it into a baby shawl. Mary Beth had used it to swaddle her dolls. God Almighty, he whispered. Mary Beth? The woman flinched. Her eyes opened. Blue. So blue it burned. Tears spilled from them instantly, like they'd been waiting years for permission. She tried to speak, but the gag choked the sound. He moved without thinking. Knife out. Rope cut. Gag gone. Her lips trembled as she stared at him like a man stepping out of a dream. Papa, she croaked. A sound split from his chest. Not a cry, not a word. Just raw pain. Then a click behind him. He turned slowly. Rourke stood 10 feet away with a rifle in his shaking hands. Didn't want it this way, he muttered. She was supposed to be gone by nightfall. You son of a... Harlan stepped forward. Rourke fired. The bullet whizzed past, cracking a beam. Mary Beth screamed. Harlan dropped low, rolled, and tackled Rourke to the ground. The rifle discharged again into the ceiling. They struggled in the mud of the barn floor. Harlan's fists moved with the fury of a decade's grief, knuckles hitting bone and blood splattering hay. Rourke groaned and slumped. Harlan stood over him, panting, blood on his shirt. He turned to Mary Beth. She hadn't moved. Knees pulled up, arms tight around herself like she didn't trust the air. I'm taking you home, he said softly. Her lip quivered. Home ain't real no more. He dropped to his knees in front of her, voice breaking. It will be. I swear it. The barn door slammed open. 2 men with pistols stepped in, soaked and snarling. Not lawmen. No badges, just teeth and hate. Rourke said the girl'd be dead, one hissed. She ain't, said the other, raising his gun. Harlan stepped in front of her. Shielding. Silent. You're not taking her, he said. Who the hell's gonna stop us? The taller one grinned. Harlan didn't answer. He drew. 2 shots rang through the barn like thunder cracking bone. The men fell. Smoke curled from the muzzle of his revolver. Harlan lowered it slowly. He turned to Mary Beth, who was staring at him with something unreadable, fear, awe, heartbreak. We gotta move. I can't walk far, she whispered. He scooped her into his arms like he'd done when she was little and scraped her knees on gravel. You don't have to. Just hold on. Outside, the rain hadn't let up, but it felt different now. Cleansing. He mounted Crow with her in his arms, wrapped tight in his coat. Behind them the barn burned. Not from fire, but from the kindling of every truth buried in its wood. As they disappeared into the storm, neither saw the shadow on the hill. A rider watching. Waiting. Following. The West doesn't forgive. But sometimes it returns what it stole. And sometimes, a man rides into hell, and comes out holding his daughter. The storm followed them like it had a score to settle. Harlan Tate pushed Crow hard through the winding forest path, one arm steady on the reins, the other wrapped around the trembling body of the woman pressed to his chest. Mary Beth, his daughter, not seen for 10 years, not buried like he'd feared, but stolen, hidden, kept like some half-ghost in that hellhole of a barn. And now she was here. Breathing. Shivering. Alive. She hadn't spoken since they'd left. Her fingers clung to his shirt like a child afraid to fall back into darkness. Her head leaned against his collarbone, soaked hair plastered to her cheek. Every so often she flinched, at wind, at thunder, at the snap of a branch. Behind them, smoke still rose faintly through the trees. He didn't know if the men were dead or dying. He didn't care. You're safe now, he said once, his voice coarse from silence and smoke. She didn't answer. But she didn't let go either. By the time they reached the ravine, the rain had thinned to a steady drip. Harlan pulled Crow beneath a rocky overhang, half-sheltered from the elements. He slid down first, then lifted Mary Beth gently, setting her on a pile of pine needles. She winced as her feet touched the ground. Broken? He asked, crouching beside her. She shook her head. Just, haven't used him right in a long time. He nodded, jaw tight. I'll build a fire. No. Her voice was barely audible. They'll see the smoke, she whispered. They always see. Harlan hesitated, then tossed the tinder aside. Instead, he wrapped her tighter in his coat and leaned her against a flat stone. Her eyes kept darting to the shadows. She scratched at her wrist unconsciously, where rope burns still marked the skin. He sat a few feet away, rain dripping off his hat brim. And for a long while neither of them spoke. Finally she asked, how long you been looking? He exhaled slowly. Every damn day. She looked at him. Eyes hollow. Mama? He swallowed. Gone. 6 winters back. Fever took her. She nodded like she'd expected that answer, but her lip trembled anyway. I used to dream she'd come. Or that you would. I should've, he said, voice breaking. I should've found you. No, she whispered. You couldn't. They never let me stay in one place long. Changed names. Moved towns. Always said if I tried to run, they'd kill whoever came. Still should've tried harder. She turned toward him. You came now. The wind shifted. A distant branch cracked. Harlan stood immediately. Hand on his revolver. Mary Beth froze. They're still looking. I know how they work. That man Rourke, he's small potatoes. But he answers to someone. A man with a red bandana. Always wore it like a badge. Harlan's brow furrowed. You remember his name? No. But his eyes. I'll never forget him. She turned away, hugging her knees. They sold girls like livestock. Told us we were broken things no one wanted. I believed them for a long time. You're not broken, he said quietly. She didn't answer. By nightfall, the sky cleared enough to reveal stars, and Harlan risked a small fire with damp pine needles. Enough to warm her hands. She didn't ask for food. She hadn't eaten since he found her. That was when he heard it. A horse's distant whinny. Close. Too close. He doused the flame with dirt. We ride, he said, already hauling her up. She tried to stand but her legs buckled. I can't. You can, he said sharply, then softened. Lean on me. Crow stomped nervously as they mounted. Harlan steadied Mary Beth against him again, voice low in her ear. I won't let them take you. Not again. They rode fast through the brush, branches tearing at their clothes, roots tugging at the horses' hooves. But Harlan knew these woods. He'd hunted here once. Knew where the stream split south and the old mining trail bent west toward an abandoned cabin. He took the back path. No torchlight followed, yet. An hour later they reached the cabin. Half-collapsed roof, moss-covered beams, and a door that hung on one hinge. It'd do. Inside the air was dry, stale. Harlan lit a stub of candle and laid Mary Beth on an old bed frame. She didn't resist. Just stared up at the beams like they might collapse at any moment. You remember this place? He asked. She shook her head. We camped here once. When you were little. You caught a firefly in your hands and said it was a piece of the moon. Her eyes fluttered. I wanted to catch stars too. You tried. Almost broke your neck, Fallon, off the stump. A small laugh escaped her lips, cracked, uncertain. But real. It was the first time he'd heard it in 10 years. He sat by the window, revolver in hand. And then he saw it. A flicker. Torchlight. Far off in the woods but moving slow. They're tracking, he muttered. Damn dogs must have caught scent. He turned to her. I need you to stay quiet. No matter what. She looked at him with that same wide-eyed trust from a decade ago. I'm not 8 anymore. No, he said. But you're still mine. The next half hour bled slow. Torchlight drew closer. He counted at least 3 figures. Maybe 4. He positioned himself just outside the door, in the dark, pistol aimed. Breath low. Steady. The first man to come near was tall, leather coat, wide brim hat. Not Rourke. Not Bandana Man either. This one looked military. Harlan waited until he was 5 steps from the door. Then fired. The shot took the man in the shoulder, spinning him backward with a grunt. Chaos erupted. Gunfire cracked. Harlan dove behind a broken barrel. Mary Beth screamed once, then fell silent as ordered. The second man rushed the doorway. Harlan caught him in the leg. Third ducked behind a pine, returning fire. Wood splintered near Harlan's head. You're outnumbered, old man, someone shouted. Then count better. Harlan barked. He fired again, another scream. Silence fell. One man ran. Harlan didn't chase. Just waited. But no fourth came. He turned back inside. Mary Beth hadn't moved. Eyes fixed on the ceiling, lips trembling. It's over, he said gently. For now. She nodded once. Then whispered, there's more coming. Always more. Let them come. No. You don't understand. The man with the red bandana? He owns half the law between here and Silver Pass. People vanish and no one blinks. Harlan's face darkened. What's his name? I told you I never heard it. But he's real. And he'll come for me. He always does. A silence stretched. Then, as if she needed to speak the words aloud or choke on them, she added, I had a child. Harlan blinked. She sat up slowly, hands clenched. 2 years after they took me. I was sold to a man in Montana Territory. He kept me locked in a cellar. When I gave birth they took the baby. Said it was a girl. Said she didn't deserve to live in filth. She choked on the next words. I don't know where they took her. If she's alive. Harlan's hand found hers. We'll find her. Just like I found you. You don't even know where to start. He looked out the broken window, rain starting again. I always find what they try to bury. The candle flickered once and died. And in that cold, broken cabin, they sat together in silence. Father and daughter, bound not just by blood, but by every scar that refused to fade. Morning would come. And with it, the reckoning. By morning, the mist hung over the hills like breath held too long. The trail to town was narrow, winding past dead orchards and creeks swollen from the night's storm. Harlan rode with his hat low, his coat drawn around Mary Beth, whose arms wrapped weakly around his waist. She hadn't said much since the gunfire. Her voice seemed buried somewhere deeper than wounds. Every hoofbeat toward town beat louder in his chest. He hadn't ridden into Dry Fork in nearly 7 years, not since the trial that never happened, not since folks whispered about his bad luck and drifted away like smoke. Back then he was just the man who'd lost his daughter. But now he was the man who brought her back. The streets were slick with mud. Rain-washed but still filthy with old secrets. The general store creaked open before they even stopped. Curtains twitched. A dog barked once, then went quiet. The saloon was the only thing awake, lanterns glowing behind warped glass. Harlan dismounted outside the old doctor's office and helped Mary Beth down. She staggered, legs trembling, but she didn't fall. Dr. Elgin opened the door before he could knock. Tate, the man said, blinking. I'll be damned. Harlan didn't waste time. She needs care. Quietly. Elgin's eyes fell on Mary Beth and his face went still. Holy, is that? Just fix her up, Harlan said, voice tight. We'll talk later. Inside, the air was warm and bitter with tonic. Mary Beth sat on the table as Elgin inspected her wrists, her back, the old burns and half-healed bruises. She didn't flinch, didn't blink, just stared at the ceiling like she'd floated somewhere else. Elgin finally turned. She needs rest. And time. A lot of time. She have any infections? Not that I can tell. But the scars are deep. Real deep. Harlan nodded, jaw tight. Elgin lowered his voice. You sure it's her? She remembered things no one else could, Harlan said. Her laugh. That green shawl. And her eyes. She was 8 when she vanished. She ain't anymore. Outside, town was beginning to stir. Wagons creaked. A bell rang at the chapel. Gossip spread like prairie fire. When Harlan stepped onto the porch, old Sheriff Holt stood waiting. Gray now, but still broad-shouldered, hat low, eyes unreadable. Word travels quick, Holt said. Faster than the wind. Didn't come for a reunion. You bring her back? She was in a barn, Harlan said flatly. Tied like livestock. Holt's gaze narrowed. Where? Up near Tanner's Ridge. A man named Rourke. Holt exhaled. That place again. You knew something. I suspected, the sheriff admitted. But there wasn't proof. Just whispers. And back then nobody wanted to dig too deep. Why not? Because the dirt had names on it. Harlan's eyes darkened. Give me one. Holt didn't speak. Then quietly, a man passed through here 2 years after Mary Beth vanished. Red bandana. Always smiling. Called himself a traitor. Real friendly with the mayor. Disappeared just as quick. You didn't think to tell me? I had no badge in that county, no power. I filed what I could. Nothing stuck. Harlan stepped forward, voice dropping to a growl. You could have tried harder. I know. They stood like that, 2 tired men choking on guilt, one buried beneath duty, the other beneath loss. A shout rose up from the street. Hey, that girl, they say she's Mary Beth Tate. The one that was kidnapped. Harlan turned to see a knot of townsfolk gathering, women clutching shawls, men murmuring, a boy running ahead with a wild look. The saloon doors creaked open, and from inside stepped Judge Kincaid. Still regal. Still clean-shaven. Still wearing that silver watch like it mattered more than the sun. His eyes found Harlan. Well, Kincaid said. Didn't expect to see you again, Tate. Didn't plan on coming. And the girl? She's mine. I'll need to confirm that. Harlan narrowed his gaze. She ain't livestock. You don't get to appraise her. Kincaid's smile didn't reach his eyes. This town runs on law, friend. Sheriff Holt stepped between them. "Leave it, Kincaid." The judge raised an eyebrow. "You forget who funds your jail?" "No," Holt said. "I remember who signs checks, and who signs silence." Kincaid's jaw tightened. "Be careful, Sheriff. Some stones don't like being turned over." The crowd thickened. Murmurs rippled like wind through tall grass. Inside the doctor's window, Mary Beth watched it all. She saw the faces of women who'd once smiled at her mother. Men who'd worked her father's fence. No one stepped forward. No one called her name. Just staring. Measuring. She backed away. Then down the hallway. Out the back door. She ran through alleyways, past the church, into the woods beyond the blacksmith's yard. Her breath came in short, ragged gasps. Her legs weren't strong, but fear lent her fire. Harlan found her 15 minutes later. Sitting on the edge of the dry creek bed, arms folded, tears streaking down mud-covered cheeks. "I can't stay here," she said, voice brittle. He knelt beside her. "I don't belong. Not really. They're looking at me like I'm a ghost or a scandal. Like I broke the rules by surviving." "You didn't break anything. They'd rather I stayed gone." He was quiet for a moment. Then said, "So would some men. Because if you stay, if you speak, names get ruined. Reputations burned. I don't want revenge." "I do," he said. "But I'll settle for justice." She looked at him. "What if that man with the red bandana comes? Then he'll find I'm not the man I used to be. And neither are you." He helped her to her feet. They walked back into town as the sky grew gold behind the church steeple. This time when people stared, she stared back. Not with shame. With fire. That evening, Mary Beth stepped into the chapel. She walked to the front row. Folded her hands. Whispered something no one heard. And when she stood to leave, she said to the preacher, "You still write names in your records?" "Yes, ma'am." "Then write mine." Outside, someone watched from a saddle. A red bandana at his throat. A twitch of a grin. Then he turned and rode west, disappearing into smoke. Tomorrow the real storm would begin. And this time it had a name. The town quieted, but the questions didn't. By the next morning, the preacher's ledger had Mary Beth's name inked beneath her childhood record. Mary Beth Tate, returned from presumed death. Some folks saw it as a miracle. Others saw it as a problem. Harlan saw it as the first right thing in 10 years. He found her in the back of the church, wiping the same pew she used to kneel at as a girl. Her hands were steadier now, but her eyes still held the weight of someone who'd spent too many nights trying not to breathe too loud. "She came here once," she said without looking up. "My baby." Harlan's spine stiffened. "I heard the man talking. Said he was donating her to the church. Said she'd grow up clean, respectable, under God's eye. Like I was dirty. Like loving her made me less." "When was this?" 8 years ago, I think. Could have been 7. I was chained most of the time. Days didn't mean much." Harlan sat beside her. "You remember anything else? Who took her? A name?" She shook her head. "Just his boots. Shut. Black as coal. And the sound they made on stone." She exhaled slowly. "I prayed every night that she'd forget me. That she'd be safe enough to forget." Harlan stared at the stained glass window ahead. The colors spilled over the floor, reds like blood, golds like fire. "We can ask the preacher," he said. "Check every child taken in around that time." "You think he'll tell you?" "No. But I think he'll tell Sheriff Holt." They left just before noon, crossing the muddy street to the sheriff's office. Holt was already waiting, arms crossed like he'd expected them. "Let me guess," he said. "You're looking for a child." "Not just a child," Harlan said. "Her child." Holt didn't blink. Just nodded once and grabbed a logbook off his desk. "We don't keep birth records. But I know someone who might." He led them to the back of the jailhouse where the old schoolteacher lived. Miss Lindy. 80 if she was a day. Still sharp as a tack and twice as suspicious. She met them on the porch, knitting in her rocker, eyes like daggers. "What is it now?" she muttered. "We're looking for a girl," Holt said. "Born about 8 years ago. Brought to town. Might have been left at the church." Miss Lindy sniffed. "Plenty of throwaways pass through this place. You're gonna need more than that." Mary Beth stepped forward. Her voice, though soft, didn't shake. She would have had blue eyes. Like mine. And a mark on her collarbone, a birthmark. Shaped like a crescent moon. Miss Lindy froze. Then slowly she stood. Walked inside without a word. A minute later she came back with a worn notebook. Pages yellowed and creased. She flipped through until her wrinkled fingers stopped. "Baby girl. No name given. Arrived in the arms of a rancher named Dewey Kane. Claimed he was transporting her for a family out west. Said the child had no kin. Dropped her off at the chapel, rode off before sunup. Kane, Harlan said. He's still around? No. Killed himself 2 winters back. Left a note that made no sense, just said, I ain't clean and neither's the land I walk on. Holt took the notebook. Where's the girl now? Miss Lindy glanced at Mary Beth, then back at the sheriff. She's in the schoolhouse. Lives with the pastor and his wife. They call her Hope. Mary Beth swayed. Harlan caught her elbow. I want to see her, she said. Wait, Holt said gently. We need to go slow. That girl's known them as her family for nearly a decade. Can't just bust in and shatter that. Mary Beth's voice was like ice. She's mine. No one's saying otherwise, Harlan cut in. But he's right. You want her to trust you, we need to go careful. Mary Beth closed her eyes. Tears slipped down, silent and clean. I don't want to scare her. Then we don't, Harlan said. We invite her to the chapel. No questions. Just a visit. An hour later, Hope was sent over by the preacher's wife. A polite request. No urgency. Mary Beth stood in the back of the chapel, fingers clenched around her shawl. Her breath hitched when the door opened. She was small. No more than 10. Hair like straw in the sun. Big blue eyes that scanned the church with casual curiosity. She walked to the front pew and sat. Mary Beth stayed hidden in the shadows, unable to step forward. Her feet rooted. Harlan watched her, arms folded, heart thudding like a drum. She looks like you, he said. No, Mary Beth whispered. She looks better. Hope turned, her eyes landing on Harlan. Then on Mary Beth. Are you the lady who sent for me? She asked. Mary Beth nodded slowly. Hope tilted her head. Do I know you? A silence thickened the air. Then Mary Beth said, I used to know someone who had your eyes. Hope blinked. Was she kind? She was scared. But she tried. The girl smiled faintly. Sometimes I get scared too. Mary Beth took a single step forward. Do you ever wonder where you came from? Hope shrugged. Mama says the Lord put me where I belong. And where do you think that is? Hope paused, frowning. I don't know. Sometimes I think I'm not finished yet. Like I'm waiting to remember something. Mary Beth covered her mouth, breath shaking. Hope stood, uncertain. Are you okay, miss? Mary Beth nodded, though her knees nearly gave. You can go now if you want. But Hope didn't move. I had a dream last night, she said, that a woman with a scar on her hand was crying. She was holding me, but I couldn't see her face. Mary Beth broke. She dropped to her knees. The shawl slipped from her shoulders. And there, clear and thin, was the scar on her hand. Hope's eyes widened. Neither spoke. Then slowly, gently, the girl stepped forward and wrapped her arms around the woman. Outside the chapel, the town seemed to hold its breath. But somewhere across the street, a man in a red bandana leaned against a post, watching it all. A flick of a knife in his hand, a smile curled like a snake. He turned and walked into the saloon. The preacher's wife would later say he paid for a drink he never took. Just left a coin on the counter. And a folded note that read, She's not the only one I buried. The saloon's floorboards groaned under the weight of secrets. The man in the red bandana sat with his boots up, polishing the edge of a dagger that had seen more than its fair share of screams. He didn't hide. He didn't flinch. He knew Harlan Tate would come. Men like Harlan always came, but they came with doubt in their bones. With hesitation. With guilt that softened the kill. He smiled as he sipped his whiskey, as if he were waiting for a child to knock on a door instead of a father carrying hell on his shoulders. Outside, the town had gathered like storm clouds. Word had spread by breakfast. Mary Beth Tate's child had been found. The girl had her mother's eyes, her fire, her blood. And now the man who stole everything sat drinking across from the general store like he still ran the place. Sheriff Holt stood on the edge of the boardwalk, thumb hooked in his belt, one hand brushing the butt of his Colt. He wasn't sure what law applied to men who sold children. There weren't words for it in the statute books. Just fire in the blood and ash in the throat. Harlan came down the road slow. His boots were caked in mud from the chapel, from the creek, from the trails he'd ridden 10 years without rest. Mary Beth walked beside him, not behind, not hiding anymore. She wore her scars like armor now, not shame. And behind her, Hope walked with a ribbon in her hair, clutching her grandfather's hand. They didn't speak as they passed the smithy, or the preacher's house, or the wide-eyed townsfolk who hadn't dared help before. But when they reached the saloon, Harlan stepped up onto the porch and opened the door like a man opening a casket. Inside, the man looked up, his grin ready. "Well," he said, voice smooth as spit and sin, "ain't this sweet?" Mary Beth didn't wait. She walked into that room like it belonged to her, like the years he'd stolen had only sharpened the blade she now held in her voice. "I remember your hands," she said. "They smelled like smoke and turpentine. I remember your voice in the dark. And I remember praying for you to die." The man laughed, slow and cruel. "You remembered wrong. I kept you alive. I gave you food. A roof. You chained me to a bed. I paid for you. And now you'll pay for me." Harlan's hand hovered near his holster, but he didn't draw. "Not yet." The man stood, spreading his arms. "You gonna shoot me in front of the whole town? That ain't justice. That's revenge." "Maybe," Harlan said. "But sometimes they look the same." The sheriff stepped in. "You got two choices. You come with me quiet, or they take you in pieces." The man's eyes flicked toward the crowd outside, now pressed against the windows. He made a mistake then. He reached. Harlan's revolver fired once. The man's hand flew back. The knife clattered to the floor. Then Holt was on him, dragging him out the door, blood trailing like ink behind them. The town watched in silence as the man in the red bandana was marched to the jailhouse. No one cheered. No one wept. Justice doesn't always wear applause. Inside the saloon, Mary Beth sat down slowly at the edge of the piano bench. Hope climbed into her lap. And the room exhaled. Later, in the sheriff's office, the man refused to speak. Refused to name who else was involved. But a folded ledger was found in his saddlebag. Names, dates, trades. Dozens. Some still children. Some never found. Harlan stood over the desk and read the names aloud, voice steady, though each one carved new scars into his chest. "We open every grave," he said. "We dig until we know." The weeks that followed were thick with pain and purpose. Mary Beth stayed in Dry Fork. Not because it was kind, but because it was the place where her voice had first returned. She helped other girls speak. Helped men reckon with the things they ignored. Hope stayed too. Grew bolder. Sang in the chapel. Laughed with the preacher's wife. She called Mary Beth Ma before summer ended. And Harlan? He started rebuilding the barn where he'd found her. Not as a place to keep horses, but as a school. A place where no one would be silenced again. One evening, as dusk painted gold across the hills, Harlan sat on the front porch of the schoolhouse. Mary Beth stood beside him, arms crossed, watching Hope run in circles chasing fireflies. "She still thinks they're stars," she said. "She gets that from you. She gets more than that. You saved her," he said, "by surviving." Mary Beth turned, eyes softer now. "You came for me." He looked at her, eyes wet. "I never stopped." They sat in silence as the last of the light faded. Then Mary Beth said, "What do you do when the world finally says you matter? You make sure it never forgets. And if you're still listening wherever you are, remember this. Some men bury their shame. Others carry it. But the ones who fight, who ride through fire and mud and a decade of silence, they're the reason some daughters are found. They're the reason dignity still has a place to stand. And sometimes that's all we need."